In the scorched dust of San Diablo, New Mexico, 1879, the sun baked the earth, kicking up clouds of grit that clung to skin like a curse. Behind the Red Raven Saloon, a ramshackle barn with splintered planks reeked of manure, sweat, and cheap whiskey. Lanterns hung from rusted hooks, casting jittery shadows across weathered faces. The air was thick, heavy with cruel laughter and the drone of flies. Elena Vargas stood in the center, barefoot on packed dirt, wrists bound with rope that bit into her skin, leaving raw, bloody welts. Her dress, once sturdy blue cotton, was torn at the shoulder and hem, exposing a dark bruise on her collarbone and another on her thigh, marks from the blows she took resisting in the wagon that brought her here. She kept her eyes down, not out of submission, but to avoid the hungry gazes circling her. The men weren't there to help. Some spat tobacco, others leaned closer, sizing her up like livestock. One pointed at the rip in her dress, muttering something that drew a snicker from his neighbor. Elena forced herself to breathe steadily, her chest aching from bruises, her throat dry since dawn. Sweat trickled down her back, drying in patches. Her thoughts were shards. She knew what could happen, had lived it before. She focused on standing tall, denying them the satisfaction of her fear. Tears would delight them. Pleading would fuel their tales for weeks. Silas Crow, the man running the show, strutted through the barn center. He wore a garish red vest, hair slicked with oil that gleamed under the lanterns and a heavy ring that flashed with every gesture. Silas had trafficked in cards and flesh across border towns for years. He didn't care what became of a woman, only that the coins kept coming. He'd won Elena in a poker game in Las Cruces from a gambler who'd lost more than he owned. She wasn't his first. He spread his arms, voice cutting through the din. "Money back if she don't please." The men roared with laughter and crude jibes. One shouted to test the goods, another feigned bidding early. The barn felt smaller, the air choked with growing malice. In a shadowed corner by grain sacks stood Lucas Navarro, 36, tall and lean, his body carved by years of ranch work and chopping timber. His coat was worn at the elbows, boots scarred from miles of trails and winter snows. Dark hair tied back in a ponytail revealed a face hardened by time, a scar slicing his left cheek from a fight with a cattle rustler. He wasn't one for trouble, but didn't shy from it either. Lucas hadn't come to buy. He rarely set foot in San Diablo. He lived alone in the Copper Hills, half a day's ride away. He'd lost his younger brother, Mateo, to bandits 5 years earlier and quit ranching after. He was in town for tools and seeds. The saloon and its barn disgusted him, but the shouts drew him in. He meant to leave after a glance. Then he saw her. He didn't stare like the others. He noticed her bloody wrists, the bruise on her side, the way she stood rigid yet unbowed like someone refusing to break. He'd seen that stance in cornered men and overbeaten horses. A cold anger stirred, different from the hot rage of his youth. When Silas repeated his money-back taunt, the laughter twisted Lucas's gut. No one expected a quiet loner like him to step forward. "I'll pay," he said, voice calm but firm. The barn went silent. Heads turned, eyebrows raised. Silas blinked. "Want to look her over first?" "No, name your price." Silas tossed out a steep figure, expecting him to back off. Lucas didn't argue. He pulled a leather pouch from his coat and counted coins onto a nearby barrel. His pulse stayed even. He didn't glance at Elena, but felt her stillness behind him. Silas took the money, his bravado fading. "She's yours," he muttered. "No spectacle to milk." Lucas walked to the post, drew a knife from his belt, and cut the rope with one swift motion. The cord fell, Elena's arms trembled. She didn't know if he'd take her to a back room, a wagon, or a brothel. She didn't know if he was better or worse, but he didn't smile. Lucas didn't touch her, just kicked the rope aside with his boot. He glanced at the exit and started walking. Elena hesitated, then followed, not out of trust, but because staying meant being bound again. The night air was cold, smelling of dust instead of sweat. Yellow light from the saloon's windows flickered behind. Lucas led her to a wagon hitched to a chestnut horse in an alley. Tools, ropes, and a folded blanket sat in the back. He stopped by the wheel and looked at her for the first time. "Get in." Elena searched his face for a hint of what he expected. No threat, no lust, just tired seriousness. She climbed into the wagon, sitting with hands on her lap. Her wrists burned. Lucas took the reins without looking back, and the wagon rolled forward with a creak. Elena kept her gaze down, catching the barn shrinking in her peripheral vision. She didn't know where he was taking her or if he was any different. She only knew he hadn't laughed, and for now that was enough. The wagon rattled along the hardened trail, San Diablo's lights fading behind a hill. Hooves, wheels, and the jingle of harness filled the night. Elena sat with knees drawn up, rubbing the rope marks on her wrists. Each jolt stung her bruises. She didn't ask where they were going. Questions had cost her before, but her mind churned. Why did he buy her? What would he want when they stopped? Lucas stared ahead, not dwelling on what the barn assumed. He was counting miles to his land. He'd left that morning for tools and flour, planning to be back by nightfall. He hadn't expected to bring anyone, let alone a woman who'd seen hell. But he couldn't stand by. He'd done that once when bandits killed Mateo while he was in a nearby town. The taste of that guilt still lingered. After an hour, the trail narrowed through scrub and dry grass. Moonlight lit the ruts. Elena stayed silent, but he heard her shift to ease her pain. He didn't turn. He knew if he looked, he'd see the welts, the torn dress, the bruises, and rage wouldn't help now. She whispered, voice steady but wary. How far? A few more miles, he answered, eyes forward. She fell quiet, shoulders easing slightly. Miles meant he wasn't handing her over in the next town. She wondered what he wanted. Men who bought women didn't travel far from witnesses unless they planned to use them and bury the problem. But he hadn't touched her. She clung to that thought. The air grew colder in the hills dotted with stunted cedars. Elena's bare feet went numb. She took the blanket from the wagon and draped it over her legs. It smelled of smoke and dry grass. Lucas didn't react, which unnerved her more than a shout. A question burned. Got a wife out there? No. Silence. He didn't ask her name. Maybe he didn't care. Men who renamed horses didn't ask about past names. Another mile passed before he spoke. Need water when we get there? She hesitated, fearing a trap. Yes. He nodded and said no more. The cabin came into view under a high moon, nestled in low gullies and dry creek beds. It was a small structure of pine and adobe, with a lean-to stable and stacked firewood by the door. No light inside, no second horse, no chimney smoke. A place for one. Lucas stopped the wagon by a trough. He climbed down and unhitched the horse with tired hands. He glanced at the wagon. Elena hadn't moved, clutching the blanket. He didn't offer a hand, just said, walk. She nodded and stepped down, careful with her bruised leg. The cold earth bit her cracked soles, but she didn't flinch. He noticed. He opened the cabin door, entered first, and lit a lantern on a table by the stove. The interior was spare. A bed, a table, a shelf with tin plates, a stove, a chest. Boots by the door. A rifle in the corner. No women's clothes, extra mugs, or spare blankets. He didn't tell her where to stand. He filled a mug with water from a barrel and set it on the table's edge. Elena entered slowly. The warmth of dying embers met her chilled skin. She hadn't been in a place without men's shouts in months. She took the mug, sipped slowly, watching him over the rim. He didn't stare at her torn dress or exposed thigh. He didn't ask for payment. He looked neither disgusted nor eager, just weary. She set the mug down. Why'd you take me? He met her eyes briefly. Couldn't leave you there. Not a grand answer, but the first in ages without a price. She didn't thank him. Trust was still a stranger. He pointed to the bed. Take it tonight. He pulled a wool blanket from the chest and laid it by the stove. I'll stay here. Elena blinked, thrown off. Men didn't give up beds. You don't want anything? No. He knelt by the stove, stirring the coals. She looked at the bed, the door, him. She didn't grasp the catch, but she was too cold and sore to argue with a bed no one was shoving her into. She stood by the table, unsure what to do with her hands, her body, the feeling of not being watched as property. Lucas didn't demand answers, didn't ask where she came from or who'd touched her. He left silence. In it, he decided, she wouldn't go back and no one would touch her under his roof. He had no plan beyond that, but the choice was made. The lantern's light glowed evenly across the walls, shadows still in the corners. Elena lingered, caught between sitting and staying alert. Her body expected commands, as always. Lucas's silence wasn't like the men who used quiet to dominate. He fed the fire, the crackle of wood a normal sound, the first in weeks. She waited for a glance of threat, but it didn't come. Her mind swirled. Fear of a trick, confusion over the bed, suspicion he'd change his mind when she slept. But a new, unwanted thought crept in. Maybe for the first time in months she wasn't in danger.